Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses and riding from the inside out. I'm Kirsten Nelsen, professional horse trainer, and with me is my partner, Deb Romero,
Sorry,
co-host,
the cat.
certified Alexander technique instructor. And once again, Lilith, my little black kitty cat, is here tapping on my shoulder, wanting attention.
Too funny.
Every single time I sit down at a
Every
Zoom
time.
meeting, yeah, she's like, from wherever she was in the house or even outside, she gravitates to the laptop. So Lily is here with us again. So
Yay.
today's topic is a little bit geeky, which we love.
Yeah, I just got out of a geeky Zoom meeting. So,
Good for you. And we're going to talk about rotational stability in horses and people because it's very different between horses
yes.
and people. And rotation is, let's start off with kind of what it is. As a function of the spine, rotation is a twisting motion of the spine, or I guess any joint, but
Yeah, you could
affecting the spine.
rotate around itself. Yeah, I guess you could apply it everywhere. Yeah.
So, like if we use a screwdriver,
Mhm.
we're rotating our wrist joint when we tighten a screw using a
Mhm.
screwdriver. That's a rotational motion of the wrist. And in the spine, it's rather than side bending left to right in a person, it's a twisting of the spine, which sort of rotates the torso left and right. And it's the same in horses, but we have to turn that torso horizontal
Ah, that's right.
because it's the same. It's still a skull, spine, and pelvis axial
Hmm.
skeleton, but ours is vertical and the horse's is horizontally oriented over gravity. And they have all of their appendages have contact with the ground,
Hmm.
where we only our legs are kind of more or
Good
less
point.
in constant contact with the ground. Because that was some of the other part you studied about was not only rotational stability, but what they call
Ground reaction forces. Yeah.
ground reaction forces,
Hmm.
which has to do with the footing, which everybody loves to
Oh,
talk about. Footing.
footing.
But
Footing.
that's why we exert different amounts of force or we balance a little differently, even humans, if we're walking in deep sand or if we're walking on something paved or if we're trying to walk on ice. Like all
Mhm.
of those kind of ground surfaces have an effect on how we manage weight and force and balance our bodies.
And you know what's interesting about people? I have no idea about horses, but most of our sensory information for balance comes up through the bottoms of our feet
Oh, yeah.
into the deep peroneals in the lower part of the leg. And they were just talking about it today, how our society, one of the main problems of balance is we're not walking around barefoot outside up and down hills to get information about forces and force management and balance because we're covering our feet with shoes.
Well, and we can fail to notice
Mm,
unequal pressure on our feet when we're in different shoes,
true.
right? And the fastest way when I have a rider who's just standing on the ground, one of the really quick ways for people to assess their own balance is to tune into the pressure on their feet.
Mhm.
And that tells us about our internal weight distribution all the time. So and all people have dysfunctional habits. So it's very common for somebody to have more pressure tuning into their feet when there's more pressure on the heel compared to
Mm,
the toes.
right.
That tells us that our weight is carried too far to the back half compared to the
Right.
front half. And if it's too much to the toes, we tend to carry our weight more in the front half than the back half. But we can also, like when we're balanced, front to back, And a little bit up to down as well, because we're vertical. Those two things kind of go hand in hand. What we feel is what you're talking about, like the arches of the feet gently sort of activate. And
Right,
rather than all the pressure on the heel or all the pressure towards the toes or on the ball of the foot, it's like the pressure is more equal front to back, toe to heel, but also the inside of the feet to the outside of the feet and the left foot compared to the right foot. So if
right.
if we want to change,
Mind blowing.
I know we can feel that so fast because that's our feed
Yes,
that's one of our major feedback loops for balance other than our eyes being happy and our ears.
right.
It's like feeling that pressure on the bottom of our bare feet while we're standing tells us how we habitually
Hmm.
carry or how we
Yeah.
habitually distribute weight throughout our body, left, right, front, back, up, down.
Yeah, and what else I found interesting is we are not born with our arches.
Really?
They no, I thought
Ooh,
so
tell
too.
me more.
Tell me
What?
more.
What?
We orchestrate them as we begin to walk as a toddler. So that developmental stage really sets us up for, bad stability or good stability from,
Interesting.
yeah.
So when
So,
we're going from crawling to kind of toddler stage,
mhm,
that's when we're starting to build arch muscles
the
and
arch support and the fascial system that holds all of that together
so we can be upright.
so we can be upright. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was fascinating. So, new
Yeah, because
research from the last 10 years so that's pretty new.
yeah, and what's fascinating about sort of weight and force distribution and balance and coordination is that having people pay attention to the force distribution through the bottoms of their feet, just by shifting weight on purpose, you're also altering coordination throughout the entire body, bone,
Exactly. It's
tissue.
all
Yeah,
webbed together.
exactly.
It one affects everything.
And like we've talked about before, I get out the camera because when people
Yeah.
equalize the weight, left foot to right foot, front, back, into out on their feet, the first thing they'll tell me is, I feel like I'm leaning forward or I feel like I'm leaning backwards.
Department
Because,
kinesthesia.
yeah, because if what's normal is to carry more weight on our heels, then when the weight through our feet is equal or the pressure, we feel like like the brain says you're too far forward because it's not normal,
And it's not the habit.
right?
It's not the habit.
And so
Yeah.
that really helps people understand how to balance as a rider very quickly because our brains have the power to normalize any dysfunction,
Anything. Anything.
right? And so we
Yeah.
call that normal and it's familiar, so it repeats, and that's where we kind of feel safe. And as soon as we start monkeying around with weight distribution and coordination, the brain screams, wrong, red alert. Like
Don't
that
go
can't
there.
be right. You're going to fall, right? And so having people feel it through their feet, even with riding boots on, you can still kind of feel it. And
You
no
can.
matter the footing, I mean, it's really best barefoot walking around on a natural surface,
Exactly.
but because that just wakes up the senses more.
It's like riding bareback.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because what
I
has
rode
to,
bareback yesterday. I was like, whoa, this is new.
there's so much more information.
More information coming
Yeah.
through your seat bones, that's for
Because
sure.
it's not muffled by the saddle and the
Mm-mm.
pad, just like that information isn't muffled with our shoes and socks if we walk
Right.
around barefoot.
And it's interesting when you do walk barefoot, how you bring back in the pause and because you're getting into your sixth sense, which is the kinesthetics of it all. And that's what we're lacking as people is that kinesthetic awareness that the horses live by.
Yeah. I also like to point out to people when I'm doing this that when they start, like once they play with equalizing weight at halt, just standing there and getting the feedback through the pressure on their feet, I go, okay, now walk around and just nowhere in particular and just play with where does your weight want to go and what would you have to do to keep it equal, like we just worked on at
Hmm.
halt. And I always try to point out to people how slowly they walk, how carefully they walk, because I go, this is what your horse is feeling and going through.
Right.
And horses do the same thing when you're changing weight distribution, force distribution, and coordination. All bodies have to kind of slow down to recalibrate that new coordination and kind of get
Yes.
familiar with it. And
Yes.
it's going to feel a little wrong before it feels right
Yeah. Yeah. And
to
you
our
have to
brains.
to the brain, to
Yeah.
the brain. And I, like you said, the pictures are worth 1,000 words.
Yeah, because
And
people
I use
can't
that all the time too. They
believe
can't believe I'm doing what? I look like that?
I look
Really?
so straight. I look like I have such good posture.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that level of ease thought comes in. We've talked about it before, that different language of what it feels like on the inside.
Yeah, compared to
Yeah,
what it looks like on the outside.
exactly.
Yeah. So that is huge. And then how does the ground kind of play a role in that?
That's what the webinar I did today was on ground reaction force. It was for golfers, which I didn't know, but that's okay. I'm not a golfer.
Hmm.
Um,
But it's a real part of our
it's
existence, whether we know
it's
it or
I don't
not.
think people, and I think they touched a little bit on elastic strain energy, and because the what it is for every pound we put into the ground, we get that back push from the ground. And I don't think people think of it for humans. We think about it when we look at a deer jumping over a fence
Or a cat jumping
or a
up on my
cat.
laptop. Yeah.
Yeah, and we
They
see
go
that. We
they
don't know
go
what it is.
down. They go down before they
Hmm.
go up.
And I sent you that short video of a guy going down kind of into a squat and coming to jump back up. And the amount of force that's being brought back under him as he comes down is huge. It spikes on the graph about the ground reaction force that's coming up to meet him. But as soon as he jumps, that's gone. As soon as you're off the ground, that's gone.
Right. Or even if we think of two people on a teeter-totter or seesaw, whatever you want to
Hmm.
call it, it's like the weight pulls one person down to the ground.
Hmm.
But once we're down and the legs are bent, we push up off the ground
Exactly.
and that shifts the weight the other way.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's like the force weight sort
Hmm.
of
Yeah.
equalization or shifting of force and weight that is all that's all the bodies do. Like that's what coordination is sort of managing weight
Right.
and force.
Well, and I like to think of gravity as a positive thing. We use all these words around it that it pulls us down and it
Yeah.
tends, and it's just not true.
Or all these
It's,
wrinkles and sags are
yeah,
like the effect of gravity, right?
it's just not true. Actually, gravity is what creates the ground reaction force to get the deer over the fence or the horse over the fence or whatever. It's
Yeah, and
that force.
I was doing a little bit of research for the what I'm calling the working like textbook of what I teach, right? And this chapter was on the point of balance. And so I kind of had to go in and research a little bit the difference between mass and weight. And
Mm.
mass is just all the stuff that something's made of. I love that. That was even on like a physics page. They just called it all the stuff. So you can think of it as all the particles, I guess, that something is made of. So like a body has a mass, and then weight is gravity
Good point.
acting on the mass.
Mhm.
So the mass itself doesn't have weight. gravity acts on the mass, which is what gives a mass weight. So, in other words, that means if we go into outer space where there's no gravity, our mass doesn't fall apart. We're still
Right.
made of all the same stuff, but we don't experience weight because there's
Mhm.
no gravity. And
Right.
even if we go in water, it's like our weight, right? Even though there's gravity under the water, we feel weightless, but our mass doesn't change when we swim. It stays the same.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
we float in water, so we're not at the direct sort of resistance of gravity. And so, yeah, gravity sort of pushes up and pulls down. It's part of that up-down
Hmm.
force that's acting on the mass of our bodies. And so, how we play with it can be kind of really help our body, like astronauts who spend a lot of time in space get brittle bones very quickly because there's an absence of gravity.
Yeah. It's a it's a force that we have to live by. I mean, it's
It
very
keeps us healthy.
it keeps us healthy. Yeah, it
Hmm.
keeps us healthy. It really does.
And when we work with it in balance, we kind of get that up force out of the ground. And so we spend less energy doing whatever we're doing
Exactly.
because when our weight and force is equalized, when we're in a good balanced coordination, we're sort of utilizing the force of gravity more than we're fighting it. And when we're in a dysfunctional coordination, like here's a good example, if our weight tips too far to the left,
Hmm.
the right side of our body automatically increases force through all the soft tissues, or we would fall over.
Well, that's because the body is always seeking equilibrium.
Right.
Yeah, so
So,
it's going to establish it in a healthy way or a not healthy way.
yeah, and that's the other thing I think you see that I see when you play with people just equalizing weight and getting that feedback through the bottoms of their feet. There's all of a sudden sort of a release of muscle tension. And it
Hmm.
can be at the shoulders, the neck, the face, or people feel their legs relax or their back relaxes. But that excess muscle tone from just carrying the weight a little bit off center, too much in any
Hmm.
direction, anytime the weight isn't centered in our body, all the soft tissues are going to increase force. They're going
Yes.
to contract more so that we don't fall over. And
And
I
all
go,
that happens until we incrementally probably suffer some sort of wake up call, I call
pain, yeah, injury, accident,
it.
musculoskeletal pain,
Yep. And then
joint.
we wake up. It's interesting to me that if we just dialed that back a little and walked around barefoot and paid attention, maybe we'd be preventing
Well,
a
only if
lot of
we're
injuries.
only if we're listening to the feedback through our feet, because I
Hmm.
go, there's tons of people who walk barefoot, but they still have what's that called? The fasciitis in the
The
heels.
plantar fasciitis, yeah.
Yeah, plantar fasciitis because all their weight is carried on the back half of their body, more than equalized front to back. So
Mhm.
I go, we have to not only moving around barefoot, just like riding bareback, it wakes up our sensory perception. But if we don't consciously control our weight distribution, then
Mhm.
our default setting that you're saying probably
Mhm.
developed as a toddler learning to
Yes,
walk, that's always going to keep us feeling normal, even if it's dysfunctional, even if it's not balanced.
exactly. And the same thing I'm goes on in horses. They have,
Absolutely.
yeah, they have their dysfunctional movement probably pre-programmed or some sort of trauma, just like us.
Well, and we also add mass,
Hmm.
increasing weight force when we ride them.
Right. Yeah,
So,
I found it very interesting in the conversation with the webinar today that the rotational stability in quadrupeds. There is not supposed to be any rotation in a quadruped.
Oh yeah. Okay, now we're full circle. We finally hit the topic today.
And that us as humans, we are supposed to be rotational because we're vertical.
Yeah. So the
So I
way,
found that fascinating. They had the picture, if anybody gets to go on YouTube, look at a cheetah running, and the head, neck, back is perfectly level, and all you see is a rotation when the hind legs come under to push.
and what do you
It's
mean? Where do you see the rotation?
the rotation is back in the pelvis.
That movement of the pelvis around the
Yeah,
hip joint.
around the hip joint to get locomotion underneath and push back. But there is no rotation left, right, I guess you could call it, supposed to occur um,
Yeah.
in
So if
in a
we
healthy
think,
quadruped.
right, because rotation specifically just means an object rotating around an axis or moving circularly around an axis. That's all rotation means. But if we talk about rotation as a spinal function, it's a left to right twisting action
Right.
of the
That's what you
spine.
see or feel or whatever you want to call it on a
R-
horse.
Right. And
Right.
it is singularly the one movement a horse can do with their spine that is not any part of classical horse training literature. It's not
That's so true.
addressed in classical training. It's not addressed in modern training. It's just not addressed. Nobody, like, that's a spinal function in horses I have to explain all the time,
Mhm.
but it's the barrel rolling, which we know all horses barrels. That's why we call it a barrel, is because it rolls side to side. And that's why our saddle goes off to one side. That's why we want a
Exactly.
sticky saddle pad or a tighter girth, right? Or it's the same reason when the massage therapist comes and tells us our horse has asymmetrical back muscle development or a lot of tightness down one side but not the other, or an
Hmm.
overdevelopment of muscle on one side of the spine and an atrophy on the other. All of that is related to the rotational function of the horse's spine. And it's not meant, it can move,
It can.
it
In
can,
dysfunction. Yep.
but it's not like ideal function of a quadruped's
Exactly.
rotation of the spine is no rotation.
It says that it should be stable. Then we've talked about most of the muscles and ligaments and tendons along the spine are for stability. And that's pretty much what they're saying. That should be stable and still on a quadruped.
Right. So like horses that have that, what do they call it? High-low syndrome of the front feet, right? Or they have an upright shoulder and a dropped shoulder, or they
Yep.
bulge one shoulder, or they have one flat hoof and one upright hoof.
Hmm.
All of that is related to the rotation of the spine. So horses have these long vertical spinous processes as part of the vertebral bones, and you can kind of think of it like an upside down boat. It's kind of like
Mm,
the
okay.
ballast, or what do they call that bottom side of the boat? Oh, yeah,
I'm
I
not a
can't
water
remember.
person.
I know, I'll think of it in a minute.
Okay.
But it's every boat has a little ridge down the center that sits in the water. And that's part of how it doesn't tip over, right? So if we think of like a little sailboat rocking back and forth, that extra ridge on the bottom are like the horse's spinous processes,
Okay.
right? And so when horses rotate the spine, it's kind of like a little sailboat tilting back and forth. So if the dorsal side or the top side of those spinous processes tilt to the left, what that also means is that there's too much body weight going to the left set of legs, and that's going to
Mm,
create a lot of muscle contraction on the opposite side, on the right
right.
side of the body. And a lot of people call that a left-handed horse and just think, oh, that's just how they move, right? So depending on the unique individual horse, they may fall in a lot on left turns and they may have a hard time turning right.
Or that I can't pick up the right lead going to the right
Or
or
some horses
whatever,
can't pick
something.
up the left lead
Hmm.
because the leading
The
leg is meant
tooth,
to reach the farthest. And so
right?
if the leading leg is overloaded, then they can't pick up that lead
No,
because they
because it's this,
barely,
they're using it for stability instead of mobility.
so they can't get it off the ground.
Hmm.
So they go, thanks, but no thanks, not picking up that lead. I might fall, right?
Right.
So rotation in a horse, the way we feel it as riders is we feel we feel gravity and the horse's body weight in this example pull us down to the left. So the top of the spine is tilting left, the weight's going left, and so our mass kind of goes with the weight of the horse. We get pulled down on
Because
the
we've
left
all been
side,
taught to ride the movement of the horse.
right? Go with the movement.
Go with the horse.
I
Yep.
go right out of balance.
Right out of balance into chaos.
And what that does to the horse's body, because if weight is excessive to the left, then the right side has to increase force, muscular tension, or we would fall off and the horse would fall over.
Right.
So the horse gets tight on the right side and we mirror that, right? So in the horse, and it's kind of a double whammy because gravity's pulling us down on the horse's
Hmm.
overloaded side and the muscular tightness the horse is generating on the opposite side has an upward pushing force against our
Hmm.
body at the same time. So the path of least resistance for our body is to go crooked or rotate with the horse, right? And so in the human body, that shows up as a lateral bend.
It's
People
a rotation.
people bend
Hmm.
the spine when the horse rotates the spine.
Yep.
And when a horse bends the spine, which is a different function of the spine, humans tend to twist.
Hmm.
And I find that so interesting that if a horse is overbending through the neck and has too much lateral bend, humans tend to over twist. And
Mm.
if a horse is
For
twisting,
compensation, that's interesting. Instead of actually physically moving weight.
yes.
Hmm.
And that's how we all compensate. So, like,
Hmm.
if the horse pulls us down on the left side, people tend to bend the spine to the right and
To get your eyes
shorten.
level, that's your vestibular apparatus going, we're not level.
Exactly.
We're not level.
Yeah. And then they go, are my stirrups uneven?
I-
Is this girth tight enough? Are my
Yeah.
stirrups uneven?
Well, what I also find fascinating is are we, because you mentioned body workers and information we can get from body workers, are we taking the information that we get from our body worker to really question our training?
So far, I would give that a big fat no.
I I asked Dr. Hancock and she says, "Yeah, no, I don't think too many of my riders, trainers, they just think I show up to fix the horse."
Hmm. Yeah. Just
Instead of taking that into, I look at it like this is my information sheet for training
me too. Because
for the
it tells
next three
me,
or 4 months. It
and
tells me where I'm missing something.
it also tells me if my training is effectively helping horses balance. Because if I'm effective, two things happen. The first thing that happens is the chronic tight spots start moving around. They're not gone right away, but every time the body worker comes, a horse in training is going to have maybe a new tight area, not the same,
Right,
same,
not the
same.
same rigidity of one place and lax in the other place.
Exactly.
That's the imbalance.
That's the first sign of progress to me is if the body worker comes and says, "Oh, well, now the horse is tight here, but not tight where they used to be all the time."
Ah, okay.
And I go, because it's a process to change the coordination
Mhm.
and get control over the weight distribution. So the first sign of progress is just that tight spot moving around the body to a new place. And then eventually the tight spots go away. When the horse is balanced, I no longer need the services either as often or for the same reason because every ride, the horse is equalizing that weight and force and not creating the same repetitive wear and tear on the joints or the same repetitive chronic muscular force or tightness.
Hmm.
And that's like what we talked about last time, shifting the stability sort of from the soft tissue to the bones.
Right.
And if you think of the bones, they have the most resistance to gravity. So they're
Hmm.
the quote unquote heaviest part of the body. And whether we're talking horse or human, the biggest bones in the body are going to be through the thoracolumbar spine and the pelvis and the thigh bones, right? And so
Yes.
that's those bigger, denser bones feel heavier. If you just picked up a bunch of bones from a skeleton, they carry the most
Hmm.
weight, right? Because they have the biggest mass. And so that's why if the horse is, where was I going with that? Oh, when the horse is on the forehand, everything from the back half has to really tighten and restrict mobility
Yes.
because there's too much weight on the front half for what it's designed to do. The front half of the horse is meant to be mobile and less weight bearing, and sort of from the saddle to the tail is meant to be stable and more weight bearing. And so if we don't help horses, it's got nothing to do with the freaking head and neck set, by the way.
Yes,
It's
please. If you get anything out of this, that's it.
yeah. And that's
Other
what
than
makes me
rotation is not supposed to happen in the skeleton of the horse. And what do
Oh,
they call
that's what I
that?
was
There's
going to
a,
say. So if they're on the forehand and rotated, you're going to have a lameness issue sooner than later, or you're going to have a
mm,
horse that either can't stop or won't go forward, because that's pretty uncomfortable when you combine those two things. And I see that combination all day at every barn. It's a
I
very
do too.
common combination.
Hmm.
And so that really creates a strain not only sort of that front half to back half, but now we have unequal weight left to right. So we've got
Exactly.
out of the four legs, one is really restricted and unable to function. And usually the diagonal opposite leg is the one that's over concussing.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
like
Well,
in
that makes sense. It travels across the body.
right, so like
Yeah.
in my
In
horse
diagonals.
when I
Yeah.
got him, his left quadrant, sort of the left hindquarter quadrant and back, lumbar pelvis area, and the use of the leg was very tight, very restricted. So where did he develop navicular? On the right front leg, right? With too much of his weight tipped forward, but also asymmetrically to the right front leg. And so that's where the bones having to take too much concussive force start to remodel. That's what navicular
And
is.
that's a good way to put it because David Gorman, who's an Alexander teacher, but a brilliant anatomical artist, if you ever get to look at his work, he actually, when he draws a bone, he draws the bone shears on
What
the
is
bone.
shear? What does that mean?
Shear is like the angle of where the ligaments had attached, and they're different on everybody as to how you load your body. So the shearing of the bone, the pulling of the bone is and how the bone was used is evident.
So you mean kind of how the forces are going through the bone.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a shear force on the bones.
Yeah.
So
And that's
that's
what
what you're saying
causes,
when they're remodeling. That's why they're remodeling because the shear force is not where it's supposed to be.
right,
Mhm.
which is also what causes arthritis or
Exactly.
inflammation. Inflammation around the joints is going to happen. And then you get the bony changes that you can see
Hmm.
on an X-ray. But again, it's to kind of cope with those shearing forces because if the weight's not in the right place, then the forces are also not in the right place.
Right.
And
So if they're how is a rider gonna feel? What is the best way to describe that rotation? Is the best way to describe it high on one side is the easiest way to, or my saddle slips, or he drops a shoulder, always going left, or whatever.
right.
Are those some of the signs for a rider to key in? We've
I
got a
think
rotation issue.
I think the first one is to look at the hard fact of wear on your saddle.
Oh yeah.
Just like you made me look at my shoes. And so once upon a
I
time,
did.
when you were helping me, all my shoes, I wore out the outside heel of
Mhm.
every pair of shoes I had. So I was pronating. I was putting too much weight on the outside of both of my feet. And I think I wore out the right heel a little faster than
Mhm.
the
That's
left.
your striking first with your right heel. Yeah.
So that's kind of the hard reality is to pick up your shoes and see how you wear them out. But also, when we use saddles, especially if it's a flocked saddle, right, we're going to see one panel kind of get harder and more compact, and the other one will stay fluffy. And the harder, more compact one is where the weight's going, and the fluffy
The
one,
stress.
right, is kind of where the tension is going. Or if we need to go buy a stickier girth, a stickier saddle pad, then instead of doing that, which way is which way is the saddle always going, left or right, right? And on some horses, when they drop their back, the saddle gravitates backwards
Mm-hmm.
because all the muscle force is shoving the saddle back. And I
Yeah.
go, so all of those forces acting on the saddle move the saddle in a direction. And that sort of helps us understand the direction the saddle's going is the same direction there's too much weight and too much muscular force, right? Because the force coming from the horse into the rider, the muscle tightness has a pushing effect
It
and the
feels bigger, harder. Yeah. Pushing,
it has
bulging,
an
all those.
upward, or it has
Mm-hmm.
a force that pushes our body, where the
Mm-hmm.
overloaded excess weight side of the horse has a pulling effect.
Mm-hmm. Good way
So
to put it.
we kind of have to see, are we being pulled or are we being pushed?
Mm-hmm.
Pulled is where there's too much weight. Push is where there's too much muscular tension. And if we sit on them bareback, it's easier to feel.
Oh yeah.
Where am I being pulled? Where am I being pushed? And
And if
that helps
people
us
if people really want to feel rotation, what I have done is being where I live, there's nothing here that's very flat. I just pick a little hill to ride bareback. And if your horse is having rotation problems, you will get sloshed
side to side.
side to side all over the place.
Well, and I don't know, maybe because horses have such long necks and they hang out in front of the torso, where humans have short necks and our head sits over our torso. For horses, lateral bending is always coupled with rotation. So if people don't understand rotation, I'll have them sit on their horse at halt, bareback or in a saddle, and really just sort of relax and receive the information. And if you take one rein and start bending your horse's neck to the left, you'll feel the barrel roll you
Rotate.
to the right. So, in other words, the dorsal tips of the spine and the body weight is going to go right. And when you bend the neck left, and the muscles are going to tighten along the left side of the back simultaneously. So, we're going to feel if we bend our horse's neck left, we're going to feel that upward push on our left seat bone and the downward pull on our right seat bone and leg and shoulder and arm and everything. And
Hmm.
then it reverses if we bend the neck the other way. And that's why when we excessively bend the neck and people think they're suppling the neck, the shoulders, the thoracic sling, I go, you're creating incredible tightness around the
Strain,
back,
huge strain on the back.
huge strain on the back and the opposite hind leg or the,
Because really the horse's neck, if I'm understanding anatomy correctly, it's really not meant to bend sideways, left, right.
well,
A
because
little bit,
all
but not this extreme all the way around to your boot.
exactly.
Yeah,
And people do that effectively, it jackknifes a horse's body. So
good way to put it.
they can't buck, bolt, rear. Like essentially
I get that.
when the neck is bent, we call it disengagement
Mhm.
because when the neck is bent left or right, the spine can't move up or down. It can't move down and it can't move up, right? So it does create, it has the effect of changing coordination pretty drastically because the horse can't drop the back. That's why they can't buck, bolt, or rear. But they
Right.
also, in the upper levels of riding, they can't lift the back with their neck over bent either. So I go, the more we think that the horse's spine should feel like a banana, the less they can lift their back because it's creating a rotation
That
issue.
and then all of the stability muscles in the back are being mobilized and they're not meant to do that.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's why we can feel it. If you sit on your horse and just bend the neck left, the barrel will always roll topside right. Right.
Yeah, and I've often used just like you said, having a rider just sit on their horse and maybe they'll cock a hind leg
Yeah.
and you can feel the rotation. That's so they've got to be able to feel what that feels like to know,
Oh,
oh,
ooh. I just thought of it. That bottom part of the boat. I can't believe it just popped in my head. That bottom part
filed.
of the boat, I think is called the keel.
Sounds right.
Yeah. I think it's Keel, keel.
I
And
think you're right.
the keel sort of prevents the boat from fully tipping over. It gives more resistance. If the waves rock the boat left to right, the keel is a little bit of a stabilizer. So it goes deeper in the water with more weight to kind of stabilize left to right movement. And a horse's spine is like an upside down keel,
Mhm.
right? And that's kind of what rotation is. So if too much weight really shifts, the keel and the forces work to prevent a fall. That's the best way to put it. It prevents a fall.
And if you think of it in a boat, if you're sitting in a boat and it tips left, you don't go
You
left.
don't go with it.
You
I
don't go
know.
with it. Come
I know.
on.
Move with the horse.
You
Move with the
move,
boat.
move with the boat
Have a
or
good
a
swim.
kayak. Kayaks are even more fun.
Yeah,
But so think about that when you're riding. It's if the boat tips left, you don't go left to stay balanced. You go to the right. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
We feel
That's a
that
good reference.
instantly because we can't blame the boat for being naughty. So we just go to the other side because we're like, otherwise we would tip it over. And
Exactly.
with horses, and here's one of the crazy parts is we're taught to keep our seat bones equal and our weight equal in both stirrups, right? So that's a big point of reference for
Wow.
riders to find their
Wow. Wow.
balance.
Mm-hmm.
So keep your weight equal between your seat bones, keep your weight equal between the stirrups and move with the horse. So what's the reality? The reality on an unbalanced torso on a horse means if that keel shifts left and body weight goes left and the right side tightens, for us to feel equal in our stirrups and equal on our seat bones, we have to go with it. We have to lighten our right side and overload our left side.
Mm.
And I go, so then the human brain goes, I'm balanced, but you're just out of balance with the horse's lack of
Right.
balance. So what I feel for is I feel personally the upward force of the tight muscles through
Hmm.
my pelvis, spine, my seat more than any other area. And so if I get an upward force that wants to push me from the right side to the left side, and my body's being pulled down on the left side, I can recenter myself and or I can just shift more body weight on purpose to the right side.
I tell people, pick up your bones and move them.
Yeah, you can pick up your
Pick up
bones
your bones and move.
and you can recenter because now the
Hmm.
normal center is off center. So you want to sit off center too, or just putting weight against that pushing force is how we resist the pushing force, right? And I call it dead weight because if we're using muscular energy to do that, we don't really get the weight because we're
No.
holding force in the muscle.
And usually the force of contraction, especially when we're riding, is an upward force and
Makes us
not a,
lighter.
yeah, not a downward force when we contract.
Right. So if I feel the barrel roll left, I'm going to put my weight on the right side.
Mhm.
And what that effectively does is I'm adding weight to where the horse is contracting muscles excessively. And that's kind of uncomfortable.
Mhm.
That creates a discomfort for the horse. And it kind of compensates if I put my weight where their weight is not. It's a little bit like spotting them until they can make an adjustment.
And they're usually pretty adaptable, considering more than humans to
Yeah, well, they want to
to
get
that
away
kind of,
from that pressure on tight
right.
muscles, so they're going to rearrange. And also, if my weight is where their weight should be, it's kind of like just supporting them or spotting a gymnast while they're learning to balance,
I like
right?
that. Yeah.
So I can spot them with my own body weight, putting my weight in the place that they're underweighted. I can throw my mass and weight right there, moment to moment, until they can figure out how to get their own weight equalized again. And it's
Yep.
very powerful. It sounds like nothing, but I
It's
think,
extremely powerful to shut down that rotation if it's going on.
yeah, because the horses are not meant to rotate.
Exactly.
And even if you think of it, because bodies are so bendy, we love to bend the horses, thinking we're suppling the muscles like yoga. And I go, but if that axial skeleton is unstable, you're actually contracting more muscle than you're releasing because
Hmm.
the weight's becoming unequal, the more out of alignment that spine becomes. And that's why not knowing about rotation, if our weight just goes with the rotating of a horse's barrel, it leads to discomfort and lameness faster than anything else.
Yes.
And if we think of the horse's spine or spinous processes like an upside down keel on a boat, it's meant to be kind of vertical and
Upright.
upright
Hmm.
and not be sort of rocking back and forth. That would be a
Exactly.
very unstable boat if the
Be like
keel
an
is rocking.
in an ocean storm.
Right. Without a cloud in the sky. Yeah. Yeah. And so that whole rotational element, because they have four legs, the legs and the major joints connecting the legs to the torso are what are meant to be mobile and adaptable.
Exactly. Yeah,
And they can,
if you go on YouTube and watch that cheetah video, and because it does it in slow motion, you'll see appropriate use
yeah.
of
And
how the stability of the spine is critical for locomotion of the legs.
I know. And that's even
Hmm.
like I read something about how even cats, like we think of cat spines as all bendy and they're like yoga masters. And I go, really, even a cat and dog spine as
Exactly.
quadrupeds They're meant to be very stable,
Hmm.
and they're not meant to sort of roll side to side.
Exactly.
That would be like a dog limping or a three-legged cat. You
Or
see the barrel.
lateral walking, which is another whole podcast.
Right,
Hmm.
right. And it's really the reason we decided to ride horses instead of cats or dogs is be big cats. I go, first of all, you're not going to get eaten because it's a prey animal. So if you make a mistake, you're not going to, you know, be
Hopefully.
dinner. And secondly, they inherently have horses of almost all the quadrupeds. Their spine up to down, like when you see a cat running, you can see the spine is pretty stable, but you can see a little bit visually of it moving up to down. That range of motion is greater than a horse's. So like cattle, sheep, horses, their thoracolumbar spine, the full healthy range of motion is only about 2 inches. It just
Yeah,
doesn't
it's very
move a lot.
small.
It's very small. And so they're inherently built to be more stable right where we put the saddle.
Hmm.
So when we get forces that are sort of unseating us in the saddle, or the horse is hard to ride, wiggly, bouncy, big mover, sloppy mover, won't move, like all of those issues that make us struggle to balance in the saddle are all signs of dysfunctional coordination.
Yeah,
The weight and forces are not in the right place.
exactly.
Yeah, it's huge,
Huge for us
huge.
in our world.
And then I think things like hills and footing and all of that, it kind of plays a role only in that, just like us, if we're learning to balance or we've come to a point where we've been using a walker and our balance is compromised, then having nice, stable, easy footing helps us regain our balance in an easier way.
Right.
And uneven footing, hills, steep things, stairs, that really challenges our balance. And especially if our balance is precarious and we've been dysfunctional for a long time, that's maybe not the best place to start to change
Exactly.
balance.
I
It's
just try to teach people how to walk
on a flat surface
on a flat surface
without
at
any
first.
extra weight. Yeah.
No,
Yeah, and that to me is kind of what groundwork is for with horses is can on easy footing or stable easy footing without too much of a hill, can you start to kind of play with your own coordination? And if they really can't, I have different groundwork techniques where I can offer some resistant guidance to say, no, not there, no, not
not
there, which
that.
is
Yeah.
what aids are, is just resistance to unbalanced forces. And so our aids don't create balance, they just resist the forces of imbalance. So
Right.
even
Well, that's, yeah.
even me shifting my weight to one side of the saddle when that rotation becomes unstable in a horse, that's an aid. My
Yes,
my weight
definite.
my weight acting as resistance is what we call a seat aid.
Yes.
Yeah, and so people who drive with the seat or move all over the place with the seat, I'm like, how do you know where to put your weight? Like, how would you have a clue to know how to help a horse balance if your seat's always moving and your weight's always shifting?
It just makes it harder for them, I think,
Yeah, it'd be like
for the
having a
horse,
squirmy kid in,
trying to balance a ball on top of the.
yeah, yeah. So, and I think that's my obsession with geeky, like
Mhm.
physics and physics terms, is it really helps clarify what balance means.
It's the reality of it.
Yeah.
It's the total truth of function, is what it is.
Yeah. And I think when I was more focused on biomechanics, which is kind of the big buzzword with horse
Yeah, it
training now,
is.
it's like everybody was still trying to move body parts around. Get this bone over here, get that leg over there, get that neck doing this or that jaw, whatever. And I go, Yeah, but as long as the weight's in the wrong place,
Exactly.
how's that gonna work? Like if we're not looking at balance in terms of weight and force and just mechanics, I guess because the mechanical part we can kind of see, but you can't
Hmm.
see weight and force.
And kinematics and the timing and feel, like I said, riding bareback, or even just get on your horse and sit on them bareback. It'll
Eye-opening.
revolutionize your riding right away as to how quick things are happening underneath you.
The other thing I do, you guys can try this at home, is because riders use the legs and the stirrups so much unconsciously to kind of compensate for an unstable torso on an unstable torso, which is the horse. It's like I put people up in jockey position. So in any saddle, Western or English, if you take your feet out of the stirrups and you bring your knees
Way
all the
up.
way up, all the way
Hmm.
up, right? It's a surprisingly stable position. You can grab mane and lean forward a little and grab mane if you don't feel stable. But when you take your legs, bend them as far as they can bend and pull the knees up to either side of the withers, man, does that wake up your sense of weight shifts through the saddle. Like that is boom. It is an instant eye opener for where that upward, downward force is going underneath the saddle through the horse's back.
And I think you had me at some point just even dropping one stirrup and seeing what happens to your balance.
Yeah,
That
and
that tells.
the dropping of the stirrups should work in theory,
Hmm.
but I know lots of riders, especially jump riders, that when you
Yeah,
take away their stirrups, they're very proud of keeping their leg in the same position with heels down.
they use tension. Hmm.
Yeah, they just tighten more and use the legs
Good point.
more. So I go, when I pull somebody's knees up to either side of the withers, they can't use their
They
legs.
can't.
You
I'll
can't
have to
cheat
try
with your
that one.
legs. Yeah. All of a sudden, you feel all those weight shifts happening under your seat, and they affect your torso a little more directly because you can't unconsciously tighten the legs. They're just out of the picture in that posture.
Good idea.
Yeah. And that's why jockeys don't need long legs. They balance just fine with their
Hmm.
legs up over the horse.
Hmm.
Like the only leg contact you have as a jockey is around your ankles. That's it.
Yep,
So there's no gripping with the legs, but the balance and the weight distribution is under their full control.
exactly. And if you see them, their head, neck, back, and pelvis is in perfect alignment,
Yeah, like a cat.
just like a cat.
Hmm. Absolutely. So I don't know what else we need to add. The topic was rotational stability in horses and people, but we kind of went all
We went
over the map.
everywhere, but that's okay.
Yeah. But and rotation in horses, like I said, it's just not recognized. I
We
mean,
don't see it. We don't think of that dimension of movement.
right. And well, we don't, it's not talked about as a spinal function
Mhm.
or what the ideal
It's
use
not
of the
supposed to
spine
be, but
is.
it's happening.
But I go with horses, every time we bend the neck, we're going to create rotation in the
We're going to
spine.
get a rotation.
Yeah, it's gonna happen,
Hmm.
guaranteed, and it's always been happening. It's not that it's not like it's something new that horses just started doing. It's just that our awareness of it, we wonder, why are the shoulders so uneven, one high,
Yeah,
one low? Why does my saddle go to one side? Why is my horse tight over on this side but not that side? Like all those things we do notice, but nobody really has the explanation.
exactly.
And I go, the explanation is the spinal function of rotation.
Ex is the spine is not stable.
Yeah, and it's meant to keep that keel upright even during lateral work.
Yes.
Like to me, that's the definition of healthy lateral work versus
If you don't,
unhealthy lateral
yep,
work
if you don't
is
cave in.
whether or not those dorsal spinous processes remain upright or if they tilt. And
Yep.
if they tilt, your lateral work, your small circles, even tight turns are going to create shearing forces like you talked about, muscle
Yep.
strain, lack of control over weight distribution, all of those things.
Yep.
So that's kind of a lot we covered today. Anything else you want to
I
add?
got so inspired by my webinar.
That is inspirational and
It
very
was.
geeky, like
I'm
very,
very
very
geeky.
geeky
Sorry.
podcast, you guys, but tried to
That's
threaded it
us.
to the practical. Because it is actually as geeky as we go, there's always a practical reason we need to know these things and how
Yes.
they work. Yeah. Otherwise, you wind up with lameness issues, behavioral
Yep.
issues, and you just wonder why, or you think you got
Exactly.
a bad one. So thank you guys for joining us.
Yes.
We really appreciate your support, your likes, your comments, your shares, your ratings, all that kind of stuff. Keeps us going. Thank you for
Yes.
joining us. And this one, hopefully you listen to it and you go out and try some of these things
Play.
right
Go
away.
play.
Yeah, go play with it because it's there,
It's
whether
very there.
whether we're aware of it or not,
Mhm.
it's still happening.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.
Thanks for
Bye.
joining us. Look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.